Deputy Marnes and the mayor traverse the silo to meet Holston's next pick for sheriff. Juliette, reluctant to leave the failing generator, makes a deal with the mayor. Can the residents of the silo survive 8 hours of darkness while Mechanical fix the generator? Welcome to Road Goes Ever On and On. Today, Sterling and I are talking about the third episode of the hit Apple TV show, Silo. So spoilers ahead. And we would like to make a deal with you. If you hit that like and subscribe button and turn on that bell for notifications, we would love to bring you more content related to Silo. And with that, Sterling, do you have a mug? Do you have a mug?
I do have a mug. Okay, a little bit of a rush job. We just got a new dog from the shelter. He's a handful, so I didn't have a lot of time. But here is...
What dis? What dis? What are dis?
What's this?
To me, it looks like some just like lowercase m's, some sad little m's, little bumps maybe, some hills.
What are those things in the air? Do you think they know about flying, or is that like a completely foreign?
Well, she does say
subject at this point.
She does say flying.
Okay.
So that's what's kind of confusing, because Alison Becker, when she talks about seeing them, she says, and there's these things flying. So she knew what flying was, but she didn't know what birds were.
Yeah.
So maybe that was a mistake, or maybe that's part of the silo.
I think it's part of the silo. Let's jump into Juliette. What
Okay.
What are your thoughts on this?
So I thought this was a great episode to show Juliette's character on how she can actually be an effective sheriff. I think that, starting off in the beginning, she was not having the best of times. She's conquering her fear of the water and drowning herself in a bottle of alcohol, basically.
But that also isn't a regular occurrence.
Right, she's not good at it.
She's not a drinker.
Right. Which I think that was, showing, how, intense her dropping down to that water, how frightening that is to her.
I think it potentially has a dual purpose. I think it both is showing how bad this is, that she's doing something she doesn't normally do, but it also kind of raised the question, not that there's anything wrong with people that don't drink. Don't drink if you don't want, that's awesome. But it does kind of raise the question of, why doesn't she drink? Especially since it does seem like there's some mystery about why she's down here. Because it did seem like her dad wasn't saying everything.
Well, so I think we know some things about Juliette's past. So, Remember when Holston was questioning her about, why she was so dead set that he was murdered? And he had done some research into Juliette and had mentioned that her brother and her mother died somehow. And I'm thinking that was possibly through suicide, maybe?
I think she attempted suicide. Do you notice that she's got some bruising?
She does have scars. Yes, I have noticed that she does have scars on her neck, and I didn't know if they were bruising
or
line.
Scars.
Ah.
It goes around.
So I do think there is a mystery from her brother and mother's death, and how it affected her and how it affected her dad.
Yeah. It definitely seemed like the mayor said, more questions than answers. So she didn't seem fulfilled with what he said. And he seemed pretty open to talking until she started asking about Juliette. And then all of a sudden he's like, oh, I've got a woman that's breaching. I've got to go.
Yeah. And saying, oh, I haven't gone down to her or talked to her because it's just too hard to get down there, he seems very estranged.
Interesting that you say that, because I I thought his excuse was pretty good. You know, he said, like, it takes... I don't have enough time to go there because it would take his entire day off, and he needs that time to rest. Which to me was kind of interesting that it takes that much time, and also that you only have one day off. You know, so like we don't know what the societal norms are here. Maybe you work 6 days a week. I don't know. But I actually took that at face value and was okay with it. But now that you say that, that is a little sus.
Because, okay, you know, fine if you want to take a day off to rest. You know, I get that. You know, like, oh, you need
For
to...
years?
Right. That's what my point. Like,
yeah.
You're going to tell me a whole year goes by and you can't take one day to go see your daughter? And plus, they have couriers that you could send messages to, and it doesn't sound like they're in contact. Like, the first question he asked, he was like, is she okay? Like, is she...
Right.
What happened to her? So, I do feel like they're very estranged. They're not talking. And reinforces the idea of her and... I think Martha is her name. I can't remember it. Her tinkerer friend. I think that showed a very touching moment between them as she decides to go be sheriff. That's more of her motherly figure. Like, that's more of her family than her dad.
Also, I think you are at least partially right about something you said earlier, which is that, you know, I thought that the two characters from the beginning were the main characters, but it just took me a second to look at the thumbnail for this show, and she is dead center, large, and then there's 4 people, 2 on each side of her, that are much smaller. So it does seem like she is probably the main character here, which was interesting because I like the 2 that we saw in the beginning. And I really thought they were main characters.
I did too. You know, Rashida Jones is a very well-known actor, so I was thinking that she was going to be a mainstay.
I still think she's going to be a mainstay because those 2 were on the right side of Juliette on the thumbnail.
Oh.
And then on the left side, it was, interestingly enough, is it Bernard from IT?
Yes.
Okay, so Bernard from IT, and then Common's character.
Yes. Okay.
So it's like those 2 on one side, and then the original 2 on the other side, and so all 4 of those are kind of smaller, and then Juliette dead center, large.
Interesting that
but it's interesting that was kind of like teased out, you know?
Yeah, and we don't see Ruth and Deputy Marnes, who I feel have been pretty pivotal characters. Right. So that's interesting they're not on the thumbnails. So it'll be interesting to see where they go.
I mean, you just may not have room for like the whole cast on, or they just may not have wanted to present the whole cast, because I do think that we'll get more of those characters.
Mr. Sims.
Yeah.
Rob Sims, I think his name is.
Rob Sims, yep.
Is played by Common, and I didn't realize it the first episode we watched it, but that's Tim Robbins that plays Bernard. I didn't even pay attention that was him. So, well,
I didn't pay attention to that was him, and so I honestly didn't think he was potentially going to be a main recurring character. I did think is like the boss, you know, of who I thought was a main character. I did think we'd potentially see him, but I didn't think of him as main. So this is interesting the way that like they're teasing some of this out, and it's interesting, I think, Juliette's portrayal in this and kind of what we're learning about her. Do you think that she learned that she can float?
Yes. Okay, I was wondering if you were going to bring that up. I think that this whole fixing that generator thing was going to quell her fears of water. We didn't see the repercussions of like her coming to terms with that, but there were multiple times where she looked terrified of the water rising up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And there were a couple times it showed her feet floating.
Right.
So I think that's why it was.
I think they teach you that you sink and you can't breathe. That way you don't go to it. You know,
Right.
that way it's like, oh, that's very scary. Because if you knew that you could float on it, or potentially that you can propel yourself by swimming, that like it's you should have a healthy fear of it, but you shouldn't be scared of it.
Right. Like you can, if you fall in water, you will be okay. You can swim. They don't even teach you how to swim in this place.
Right. Yes.
Not all seems what it seems to be.
Yeah.
And signs and tattoos and let's get into it.
Tags. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You first. I'd like to save my Christmas present.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know when this comes out. This maybe well after Christmas. I want to save my present.
This is coming out on. Oh no, this is after Christmas. This is coming out on New Year's. We'll be on New Year's.
Okay. I want to save my New Year's surprise.
Okay, New Year's surprise. Perfect. So, not everything is as it seems. They humanized Common, Mr. Sims, where
and he humanized the other candidate, or that he was saying, you know, he's a good guy. He would care for the people or something like that.
which at first when he interacts with the mayor and Deputy Marnes, he seemed like he kind of had this ill intention of kind of intimidating them to like be like, hey, I'm the force of judicial, but like surprisingly seemed very genuine in like offering them the sweets and like just trying to be like a nice guy. And then we see him have a child, and the child is scared of the dark, and he is comforting the child. Like, really humanized this guy that seems like is going to be the big bad of the silo.
Or I don't know if he's necessarily the big bad, or if it is things that are afoot in judicial, and like maybe it's the judge and what comes out from there, you know. And I don't know. He does, like you said, he seems like a good guy, so I don't know about that.
I did love the foreshadowing of them giving that treat to the mayor, and then her seemingly being poisoned by someone.
Yeah. Which I wonder how that happened, you know? How and who?
I think Bernard is definitely in on judicial somehow.
Okay, yeah.
And one reason I think that is when he confronts the mayor, he says to her, "You made a deal with Juliette." She said, "How do you know that?" And I think he had listeners somewhere listening to that conversation, and it makes me believe that he might have some hand in her poisoning.
And I think as like I don't know if he's like the head of IT, but I think that whatever it is that he does has given him serious power. Like, I think he seems almost equivalent, like almost like a third branch, you know, like there's like judicial, there's like the sheriff, and then there's, you know, IT is like this kind of third part. Like the fact that she had to go with like a peace offering to try and get something, you know, this wasn't just friendship where like the friend who's the fixer upper, you know, like she didn't need to be given anything. They just had a nice conversation. They talked pretty openly, but you know, Bernard had to be kind of like traded with and like treated a certain way in order to try and get some help and get some information.
Well, and so I wonder, so okay, like the way that you're speaking, she talked to the doctor that was her father. She talked to the tinkerer, and she talked to Bernard, and Bernard was the one that said Juliette Nichols is the worst. He said she steals things. We should never consider her.
She stole one thing, and he's like, she is a thief.
Yeah. Well, we can't have her be chef. She stole the the tape, but he already knew who she was. Like, I'm sure there's a ton of thieves in the silo that steal things here and there. So the fact that, like, he remembered her specifically down in mechanical makes me think that they are definitely keeping eyes on her.
Do you think he potentially knows the truth of her past, but because it's not known to the mayor and the deputy, that he didn't show his hand on that? Like, obviously, if she was branded a thief for taking that, she probably, like, was put in holding for a day or had to do some kind of, like, it was put on her record.
Yeah.
Versus, I wonder if he knows other things that aren't on her record and didn't mention that because it's like he doesn't want to show what he knows.
I know that her record is known about her family because Holston knew it.
Right.
He did a...
But he knows about... He knows about the family, but it seems like there's still more about her that's not known.
Maybe more about her, but yes, he did seem to know something about her family, and he said someone with your history of what happened to you and your family. So I feel like Deputy Marnes and the mayor could have access to that information.
Okay. Did you notice some of the, like, interesting things about, like, tattoos?
So not... I noticed that most of the people in the down below have tattoos.
Yes. And the main engineer, and maybe I'm just, like, reading tea leaves, but his tattoo looks like a river or something along those lines. Like, so on the bottom, it looks like there's, like, a shoreline, and it's much wider. And then up here, where you see peeking out, looks like it could be, like, the head of a river. Like, it is much smaller. And that seems pretty interesting because that, like, we once again haven't seen books. So something like that would have to be passed from person to person in order for that information to be known. And, I mean, inking would be an interesting way to do that, where you can have that visual that you can remember and other people can see. Maybe I'm reading tea leaves, but it seemed like something that probably a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know or be able to draw or at least have seen.
Right. And,
like, we haven't... There are no pictures.
Yeah.
Everything that we've seen has been, like, drawn or painted.
Right, which... It's a very cool parallel between that and tattoos. Like, they are a society that only draws and displays their history maybe through pictures of hand-drawn pictures. And how could you do that through tattoos? Like, I wonder if Knox, the guy that has the big tattoo, has just had, like, seen that on... the lead mechanical guy beforehand. And, it's like, oh, we got to get our whatever this is tattooed on us. And maybe he doesn't even know it's a river, but it's, like, passed down. Almost reminds me of Christopher Nolan's movie, Memento, where he has to remember things through the tattoos laid on his body.
Yeah.
Also...
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, this might be the Christmas present, or the New Year's present.
Okay. Go ahead.
We cannot trust the monitors.
Why do you say that?
As the generator was shutting down, and everybody was in the safe zones and the cafeteria. As the power goes out, it switches for a split second to beautiful green, lush, and the birds.
I should have paused. The bird was it? Do you think it was the same thing?
Maybe it wasn't the bird. Actually, it might not have been birds. I might be conflating because I'm in the process of editing our last video, and I might have seen birds from there. So it may not have had birds.
I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch that to see what was shown. I don't know why it didn't freeze frame on that.
Fact that we can see a different outside. We can trust nothing.
Right. I know. We also, I don't think, can trust this show yet. I think that. So when we first were watching the show, I have been enjoying it, but it has seemed like a somewhat simple puzzle box story where it's like we're being fed the questions to ask rather than like seeing things and asking those questions ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of feels like we're being like spoon fed, you know? Rather than necessarily being able to, figure out what are the questions we should be asking. But it's already taken a turn with which characters are necessarily the main character, and I think that this might be hiding a lot more, and the premise that we were given in the beginning might not be the those may not be the most important questions. So I saw a sign,
Okay.
So this is in the in that like engineering room.
Right.
Okay, are you ready for this?
I'm ready. Lay it on me.
You sitting down?
Let me check. Yeah, we're good.
Okay, I want to make sure. Okay.
I'll sit down.
So it has a bunch of text, and then over the text in very large letters, it has in a different color. It has like SD, but the main text that you see says the syndrome. Do you know the signs? 1. Involuntary twitching is the first sign, leading quickly to 2. Shaking of the extremities. 3. Flashes of pain and muscle spasms are next. 4. Balance and movement is severely impaired. 5. If untreated, infection will attack the brain, resulting in reduced cognitive function. And finally, 6. A shutdown of the entire nervous system. For those who are infected or think they may be, advice and treatment are free at any medical level. You must report your symptoms there to receive the necessary treatment. Don't be afraid. Be honest. There is help. And then there's the 4 people that, like, we've seen, like, the hands up people, in the circle. Except this is just 4 of them in a row, not in a circle. And then under that, in smaller print, it says, clean living is the real safeguard. To me, this feels like a potential change in what, like, why they're down here or what is going on. Like, I think it's very possible that people really are down here for their own protection. And maybe, I don't know why withholding information is important, but there is so much that's withheld. Like, you can't have a radio.
Right. Can't have a radio.
Can't have knowledge of the before times.
It goes against the pact.
It goes against the pact.
Which is... So, not only... we've seen a little bit of teases of the pact of, like, if you say you go outside, you are let outside.
Right.
But part of the pact is you can't have radio communication with each other. They have the ability to make radios or have radios.
And obviously the sheriffs can have radios because that seems like common knowledge. But the general public can't. Which is interesting.
It is. Okay, so do you think that sickness is related to the outside? Because the symptoms that you read were very similar to Holston Becker's symptoms. He couldn't stand...
But it says if untreated. Like, I mean, that happened, like...
Well, because what I'm thinking is, what if it comes from, like, seeps in Like they don't have like a complete
Okay.
ventilation system. And
Oh
if you're out
yeah.
there, you get dosed with a huge amount of it all at once. But in
Right.
here, it slowly seeps in. Or it could be something related to like being trapped down and mechanical for so long.
Yeah, I don't know. It just that was such a weird thing to have, and it was in a number of shots because it was in kind of a prominent place.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't super easy to read. I actually ended up having to turn to Reddit to like I read enough of it that I had kind of like an idea of it,
Uh huh.
but I didn't have the full picture of like every word. And then when I like, especially on the bottom when it says "clean living is the real safeguard," that was way too small. But then seeing that like written out, it's like, oh, that is.
I think I know exactly which sign you're talking about. Does it have like the red letters on it? Like there's like
I,
the writing,
so
and it's like the red
yeah,
letters are
I
behind
think
it.
DS is like yes, like D or SD, like
Okay.
possibly like syndrome. You know,
Mm.
SD was like in big letters, and then the rest was kind of normal print.
I know exactly which poster you're talking about, and I've seen it a couple times, and I was like, I wonder if that has any relevance. But it seemed like I couldn't read it in like every shot, and so I just kind of like, be fine. So I'm glad you.
Also, kind of talking about signs and symbols. You know, I mentioned this in the first or second episode. That I think the first episode that there is a circle symbol that surrounds other symbols, like the people holding hands
Mm-hmm.
is surrounded by that. At the cafeteria, the tree is surrounded by this circle symbol where it's like the right side of it is a very thick line. The bottom left side of it is like medium thinness, and then the top right side of the circle is thin. And the sheriff's no, I think the mayor's badge that she has seems to have the same circle. And then in the last episode, the second episode, that sign that they weren't supposed to cross, you know, that was
Mm-hmm.
covering the hole,
Yep.
it had that symbol with a person in it and then like a line going through the person as if like, you know, like no person going through here.
Mm.
So I don't necessarily think the symbol means anything. Maybe it represents the pact, and so a lot of things that are related to the pact are surrounded by this circle.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it represents like the silo. I don't know, but it does keep cropping up, whatever it is. So it is
The,
used a lot by the society.
the doctor even had a silver metal one, a small metal one on his lapel. I don't
So
know what it is.
but who knows?
Who knows?
So I'm in. I'm
Okay.
invested.
Okay.
And
Glad
I
I'm
think this next episode could have the first bombshell.
okay.
Because like I think this last episode was a bit of like a thriller. You know? It's like the will they won't they of will she take the position? Will she be offered the position? Will she take the position? Are they going to be able to fix the machine? That one person who was lost and asked for help,
Yeah.
I thought that was going to be the start of like a riot where the sheriff or like the deputies were being lured to a spot where they would be attacked. You know, like I was waiting for something huge to happen, and everything was fine. And they've been setting this up as like
So
riots are right around the corner. So like I was tense the entire time, and then nothing happened. So I do feel like something is coming. And I don't think it's necessarily going to be a big action moment like a riot. I think there is potentially going to be a very interesting reveal, and I don't think it's going to be the last reveal.
agreed. And I think that's why I really liked the generator scene because like I wasn't sure if they were gonna fix the generator. You know, you were hoping,
Right.
or like, are they gonna fix it at the cost of one of these, you know, people that are trying to fix the generator? Like,
Right.
I
Like, is
didn't think
Coop
Julie.
gonna?
Yeah, is Coop gonna? The thing's gonna go on and just bye bye Coop. He's just this innocent shadow guy, and
I
so.
was ready for Coop to go. I was ready for that deputy to go. Like,
Hmm.
something was gonna, something was going down.
And it was just the mayor. The mayor died,
We,
or
we'll
the
see.
mayor is poisoned. We see at
So
least blood's coming out of her mouth.
she definitely looked dead, but I think until it's pronounced,
Yeah.
I, it's hard for me to believe deaths until it's like known.
So there are a lot of interesting things that I feel like we learned about the silo in this episode. We learned where the generator gets its power from,
Right?
steam that comes from
Yes.
below.
Yeah.
I think where that steam is coming from might be important.
Okay.
And so, okay, here's a crackpot theory. I hope you're ready.
Okay.
And this kind of
Yeah.
starts leading into the comparison, a little bit of compare and contrast with Foundation. So
We can transition into that as well. So yeah, that works.
perfect. So Bernard talks about every day that there is no sheriff, we are 1 point closer to disaster.
Right.
And for me, this felt a lot like Psychohistory from Foundation, where he has these numbers that he can crunch, and he can have these predictive models of how the silo will turn out.
Okay.
And my one theory about this is, how could he have these predictive models if there's no information to base this off of? If all the information was wiped 140 years ago, what is the data that he is using to make these numbers exist?
Right.
And so I'm thinking maybe there's previous silos, but I think there might be multiple silos. And maybe multiple silos stacked on each other, and maybe the exhaust from one silo, the steam that they are getting, is what's powering their silo. Maybe it's a crackpot theory, but I think that for them to have this data, they would have to have other silos or whatever to compare it off of.
I like that idea. I not necessarily the stacking, but the multiple silos. I can potentially get behind. I think so. I think this is the episode that I has really has me kind of hooked, where it does seem like there is much more going on than what was originally kind of alluded to, and so I'm all in.
I love it. I love it. And okay, so like another thing that I wanted to contrast a little bit, like I enjoyed Foundation, but I think because of the scope of Foundation, like how big it was, nothing like for like whenever the characters were in danger or I never felt like the stakes were high enough. I didn't feel like you think about like the second or third episode of Foundation, we're losing characters, but it doesn't seem like we're
Right.
really like that invested to losing characters.
Yeah.
Where watching this generator scene of them fixing the generator, we've only really known Juliette for an episode and a half at this point,
Yeah.
and her shadow, Cooper, we barely know. Knox is in one episode basically, and watching them try to fix this generator and like knowing what the stakes are of this losing this generator, like the whole silo could go down. We might not get power back. If we don't have power back, like we're already on the teetering of like hopefully everybody in the silo doesn't rebel.
Yeah.
So I feel like this show makes me care about the characters more, makes me feel like the stakes are higher, even though it's more compact.
It's interesting when you kind of say the comparison part, because this show is actually doing some things that are very similar to Foundation, but it's doing it in such a different way that it doesn't feel at all the same. So Foundation did the trick of some of the people that you think are important aren't necessarily the most important. There are other characters. You don't find out about them until later. And it seems like this show is also doing that same kind of trick, but it feels completely different. With Foundation, we knew that the scope was enormous, and that it was going to take us a while to see the big picture, whereas this one, the scope, obviously there are mysteries you don't know, so you do know that it's a bigger scope than you necessarily know, but it felt like a much smaller scope. But the more I'm watching this, it actually seems like it's a much bigger scope than I thought. Like, you're talking about multiple silos,
Yeah.
The world population can't be, what is it, 10,000? 100,000? I don't remember. It can't be that. They're like, or at least I hope not.
Right.
So it definitely seems like it's probably a much larger scope than we realized in the beginning, and the show did a pretty good job of hiding that. So I'm digging it.
Definitely digging it as well. I think that because, like, I'll go back to that second episode of Foundation where the one girl was like demanding that her and Gail had been together for so long, you can't yell at me, or like, we've been through so much.
Right.
And since we like never saw that, like, we just, Allison and Holston Becker, we knew them for one episode, but we saw them for like a year of like going through trying to have a baby and being told what to do in IT. And Allison, when she died, I cared for her. I cared for Holston Becker. I saw their relationship. So when they both died, it was heartbreaking. It was really sad. This show, I feel like, makes me feel more. Like, Foundation is cool. It's interesting. I can see that it's a big scope. But this episode, and the show, I'm invested in the characters. I'm invested in the safety of the silo. I feel more.
For me, I'm very intrigued by the secrets.
Yes.
I don't think my investment is as necessarily as much in the characters, but whatever it is that's being hidden, I wanna dig down to it. Like, I'm there.
Something interesting I noticed is I feel like the silo, they do a really good job showing the down deep is kind of, a lot of people have tattoos. It seems like a lot of things down there are like hobbled together. It seems almost like dark and gritty. I don't know if it is a completely different caste system, but it does.
It definitely seems like it, because when the mayor was talking to Juliette's dad,
right,
she said, "Why would somebody from the mids, whose dad is a doctor, be down there?"
Mechanical.
So that it definitely seemed like a caste system.
But what's very intriguing to me is that in IT or wherever Bernard works, that was the most vibrant color we've seen. Like, even the blue, like the hallway with all the blue doors, even his office compared to her office, like the mayor's office, who's somewhere at the top, her office is dark, still dreary, doesn't have a lot of color to it. His office did have a lot of color to it. So
okay, I'm glad you said that, because
okay,
I had thoughts on this, and I didn't know if I was being too sciencey nerdy and history buffiness that I was like going too far and reading into some tea leaves, so I just didn't say it.
Okay, now I want to know.
But in history, there hasn't been a lot of blue, because blue, there's not a lot of naturally occurring blue pigment in the world. In many of the things that we actually think of as blue, things like butterfly wings and bird feathers, a lot of those things are actually, it's not pigment that is absorbing certain wavelengths and letting out other wavelengths in order to be blue, but instead it's actually the shape of the thing at a microscopic level. And so if you crush that in order to try and make a pigment from it, you end up with, I don't know, like gray or black or something like that. It's the actual pigment isn't blue. It is the shape of it that is trapping certain light and allowing other light to escape. So historically, there hasn't been, in the past, there wasn't a lot of blue, and blue was a very royal color, or like wealthy color.
Right.
So, but then I kind of thought, like, I don't like this is. We know that we know that the Statue of Liberty is a thing. Like, there, at this point in our lives, there's plenty of blue stuff, so it wouldn't be that hard to rob a Home Depot and grab all the blue paint. But now that
In
you
a
say
silo.
that, how vibrant it is,
Yeah. And I think
and that stuff wears down over time, so you'd have to like reapply.
yes.
And so, like, where is the... Yes.
And I felt like it was too vibrant. Like, even there was the part where we see them at the park, which is this lush green park,
Right.
but like it still feels like it's in the silo. It makes sense where it's at. And
Yeah.
the strawberries were really red. That showed like another piece of that opulence of like
Right.
fresh
Yeah.
cut strawberries. But those blue doors and that whole building of where Bernard is and his office made me feel like he's part of the bigger picture.
Oh, yeah.
He wanted Judicial's guy to be put
Paul.
in.
Yeah.
Paul.
Yeah.
He was anti-Juliette. He was
Yep.
anti the IT article. I think he is some person that's organizing some part of what Judicial does.
I agree.
But with that, I believe our journey has come to an end. Thank you folks so much for joining along with us. Next week we will be tackling Silo episode 4. So come back, join us. I'm Mark. This is Sterling.
Thanks.